Hello and welcome to Legal Thinking with me, Ed Wootton, and my co-host Liam Pape.
Hello.
This week we're talking about a very important subject, which is disability inclusion in the workplace.
Yeah, what really struck me about the conversation that we're about to play is how many nuances there are to this issue that aren't discussed.
Yeah, definitely. So to clarify who we're talking about, I spoke to Julie Kaya, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Diamond Light Source, and our very own Kate Benefer from our employment team.
And here's the interview.
Welcome to the podcast, Julie Kaya and our very own Kate Benefer. And today we're going to be talking about, as we discussed, ED&I, or Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and how you can improve access to employment for people with disabilities. And I guess my first question, and I'm just going to throw it out to both of you really, is why is it important to bring more people with disabilities into the workplace, or make it more accessible for them?
So there's going to be a number of reasons, one of which is going to be a legal duty. So employers have a responsibility and a legal duty to make reasonable adjustments for individuals who suffer a disadvantage as a result of a disability. So if somebody is unable to carry out the full aspects of a role or unable to access premises, for example, due to a disability, it would be employers' legal duty to make adjustments to accommodate that, provided those adjustments are reasonable. And a failure to make those adjustments could result in the individual pursuing a claim of discrimination against the employer. So from a potential liability perspective, it's worth the employer complying with that duty. But in addition to the legal duty, there's also the advantage of being open-minded in relation to as wide a candidate pool as possible, encouraging those with disabilities into the workplace as they may have skills and experience that others don't have.
So it's about bringing in kind of new perspectives. Is that how you'd see it, Julie?
Yeah, I guess for me, working in EDI and diversity for a while, there's usually, when I talk to people, there's usually a legal case, which Kate's just covered, a moral case and a business case. And for me, I think in our organisation anyway, if I ask people why should we support disabled people in the workplace, and I'm using disabled as, under the social model of disability, not the medical model. So it's the environment that, disables people from our perspective anyway. But most people, I think, in my organisation would say, well, why wouldn't we? It would be kind of a bit mad. Apart from the duty, it would be mad to exclude anybody, really. We have really passionate, very, very clever people, and they're difficult to attract. Their knowledge is very in-depth. They're scientists who know about one aspect of something, including COVID. So why on earth would we make it more difficult to not have the very best, people with the best skills and the most passion? So for me, it's always about that. It's about people. It's motivating as well, to make sure that you're a great employer who considers the needs of everybody and their individual needs as far as you possibly can. And people see how we treat each other. If you've got an organisation where, and obviously with social media, this is exponentially, it's, something that happens in an organisation. It goes into the ether really, really quickly, and you get a bad reputation. It's not what you want. Why would anybody want to work somewhere? So it's not just the disabled people themselves; it's for everybody around them. I could go on a bit about this. I better stop.
Well, no, that's why we have you on, because you're keen to talk about it. But I think there are obviously challenges for employers in kind of making a workplace more accessible, or making any kind of employment accessible, especially for maybe more physical types, especially if you're trying to attract people with physical disabilities. For more physical jobs, there might be challenges, or just generally making offices accessible. To Kate, I guess, given your experience as an employment lawyer, what are the usual hurdles that employers have to kind of or that they find when they're trying to make employment more accessible for people with disabilities?
Yeah, so one of the usual challenges that employers face or perceive to face is one of cost. So employers often say to me that they can't make certain adjustments because there is a concern about the cost that will result in. But often adjustments can be made that are quite simple and don't necessarily have to be huge amounts of cost. For example, some people just need an adjustment to their duties, adjustments to equipment that may be provided for them. It doesn't always have to be something that comes with an overall cost. The other challenge that employers will often talk about is the unfairness or perceived unfairness in relation to other members of staff, where adjustments are made which perceived to make it an easier situation for the individual who has a disability. For example, if their targets are reduced, or they're allowed to come into the office later or work from home, and other people feel that that's unfair. And I really think that is addressed by dealing with communication to make sure people understand that other employees may have different arrangements for very good reason. It's not that they're just not pulling their weight. So it's about an awareness and communication with other members of staff to overcome that difficulty.
Mm-hmm. And it's that word adjustment that comes back as well. And the one that obviously we commonly hear is reasonable adjustment. I just wondered if you can give some kind of perspective on what a reasonable adjustment might be in the context of disability.
So the requirement as a legal duty is to make reasonable adjustments to alleviate a disadvantage. It's not a requirement to make any adjustments that an individual may want. But those types of adjustments can fall into sort of three different types. The first is an adjustment to physical premises. So, for example, putting in a ramp for somebody with a physical disability. So we're talking about things in the building. A second is things relating to equipment. So somebody may, for example, want to have a different chair if they've got problems with a bad back or something like that, or equipment in relation to a different screen or a different desk setup, or physical support in relation to other roles. If they're working in a more physical role, there may be equipment they can be provided with to assist with that. And then the third type of adjustment is in relation to the individual's job. So that may be to enable them to, for example, change their hours, change the location that they work from. So, for example, work from home, or amend their duties. So either tweak their targets or remove certain aspects of their duties that they can't perform as a result of their disability, so that they can still perform the role as a whole, but are perhaps given a focus on the aspects that they can do well, and other aspects are given to other employees which are more difficult for them to do as a result of their disability.
Right. Okay. And are these the similar kind of challenges that you experienced, Julie, when you were trying to make your workplace more accessible?
Yeah, I think if you pinned me down to one challenge, I'd say lack of awareness. When I first started at Diamond, I did a baseline assessment and I interviewed about 150 people, and it was clear quite quickly. This is how we developed our strategy, by the way, but it was clear quite quickly to me that people didn't understand, one, what the definition of disability is under the law, which is really, really broad. They didn't understand. Often people would talk to me about their condition or some of the barriers or some of the impacts that were affecting them, without realizing that, we had a legal duty, or that we wanted to change things. People were often embarrassed, or they didn't want to share. I remember having a conversation with one person who admitted to me that they had that they'd struggled in meetings because they had glaucoma, for example, and hadn't been aware that we have a duty to support them in the workplace. So things like, raising awareness around sight impairments, and making sure that when you give presentations, you give the information in advance as far as possible. So I think the biggest single issue is lack of awareness, but obviously that has an impact on lots of different things. There's an awful lot you can do about that. Kate mentioned communication, so lots and lots of things you can do about communications, and telling somebody something once is just not going to be enough. So we do a lot around events. We have information on our intranet. We have we do Inclusion Week every year, where our disability network presents on the work that they're doing. We have a drop-in our disability network is called Universal Accessibility, which kind of sets us up as a vision for making Diamond accessible and welcoming to everybody. And it's part of our strategy. It's one of our key goals, actually, to achieve universal accessibility. And what we find is that it helps everybody. So it doesn't just help people who might be facing challenges and barriers. It actually makes things better and easier for everybody. So.
Yeah, do you think it helps people who maybe, like you mentioned about the the issue that one person had glaucoma? Do you think it helps people who maybe do have some kind of disability that they didn't feel qualified for support come forward and get the help they need to become an even, more valued employee than they already are?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are different groups of employees and they need slightly different things. But yes, absolutely. The communications needs to cover all the different kinds of employees. So what I mean by that are younger people coming out of university. We take on a number of PhD students, for example, and they'll quite often have a statement, an educational statement saying that they have dyslexia or autism or something like that. So neurodiversity is a big thing for us in Diamond. So the way we would support them would be different than our older population. So a lot of our engineers are older, and there's a strong correlation, obviously, between disability and age. So it might be 20% is the figure that's often bandied around in the wider population of people who would have a disability under the definition. But it can be up to 40% when you get into the older age ranges. And often those things are things that people just sort of shrug and say, well, I'll put up with it, particularly men. They often don't, they don't want to think about themselves as having some kind of impairment, when actually it's just, for us anyway, in my part of the organisation, it's business as usual. So many of us have something. I have dyscalculia and ADHD. I also have cubital tunnel, which has been going on for a long time. I've back problems, chronic back problems, coming into the menopause or through the menopause. All of those things interact together. So it's often not one disability. It's often many different things, and they can intersect with other issues, So yeah, you kind of have to, your communications, coming back to your question, needs to be really broad and varied to take into account all of those things that, people might be affected by. Can I come back though to something that Kate said about changing duties? Because that's often something that we come up with. So I'd just like to give you an example that I had. So I had my diagnosis for dyscalculia in 2014. I was unaware before then that I had a condition and that I could be supported, because I made so many mistakes, around clocks and calendars and diaries and invoicing and things like that. Part of my adjustments, my reasonable adjustments, were to have somebody to do some of those things for me, so that I can then concentrate on the things that I'm really good at, connecting people together and raising awareness, training people and all of those kind of things. And it's worked really, really well. But in order to achieve that, we used an external expert called Genius Within, and I had coaching to help me with some of the things that I struggle with. I'm never going to be able to be good at maths because my brain just doesn't retain, numbers and times and things. But some of the things that I can do is gain some awareness of how to explain those things to other people. And you do have to explain those things to other people quite often, I find, because we forget, So in terms of adapting things, those things can often be the most useful things, but that does involve people, being comfortable with talking about it. So any kind of rumor that somebody didn't get support can do a lot of damage in those situations. So having line managers who are supportive is really, really important.
Yeah, and do you think it seems like ED&I has been much more on the radar of employers over the last few years. And do you think this is a growing space? Do you think most employers are now aware of it, Kate, or is it still got there's more to be done, or where do you think it's at?
So I think employers are better than they were. I think it is something that people generally are more aware of, and employers are taking a responsibility for dealing with. But I still think that there is further to go. I think employers can do more. I think they could certainly do more in relation to being a bit more proactive and thinking ahead and planning for adjustments rather than reacting to a particular individual raising concerns. Often adjustments are only looked at when there is a problem, a performance issue, for example, or a concern that's raised by an individual, or they're absent from work and medical information is sought as a result of that, rather than proactively thinking, how can we support our workforce, or how can we support potential candidates to join our workforce? Picking up on what Julie mentioned about general awareness of disability, I think there's a few things to think about from an employer's perspective. Firstly, I think the word disability sometimes is misunderstood or perceived to be different to different people. So a number of individuals may, if they're asked if they have a disability, may not consider their own health condition to be a disability and may not feel that they're entitled to support or any adjustments from their employer, because they don't think that what they have justifies that support. People often view disability as being the same as what entitles them to claim benefits or to have a blue badge or something like that, as opposed to the employment definition, which is a far lower hurdle. There's also an issue, I think, in terms of awareness and understanding amongst employees about particularly things like mental health. So the conditions that perhaps are less visible, that people can't see that somebody may be suffering or may need support. And employers can do a lot to raise awareness about types of conditions, support that's available, and make people understand that the employer is willing to help, and that people should come forward and talk about their health issues before it becomes a problem, so that the employer is offering that proactive support.
Yeah, and do you think, just jumping to the elephant that's been in the room for the last 2 years, do you think COVID has brought more of an awareness of that, just due to the people who've had to shield and all that kind of thing, or who maybe have to work at home more often? Or
I certainly think that the COVID situation, the pandemic, has made people more aware of things like anxiety. I think previously people who suffered from anxiety may not have felt comfortable in talking about it, and that obviously is still going to be the case for some people. But I think with so many people feeling anxious about COVID and the pandemic, I think people now, as a positive thing, feel more comfortable in talking about that, because it's a shared concern that lots of people do have. I also think that COVID has brought out an awareness of the kind of physical conditions that people may also be suffering from, which has made them more vulnerable to COVID, but generally makes people aware of those vulnerable people that perhaps people didn't understand and know about previously. So some positive in that people now have a greater awareness of the conditions that people may be suffering from.
Yeah, and is that what you found as well, Julie, in trying to make people more aware of the different disabilities, that this kind of heightened awareness of who needs to be shielded and who might be anxious about getting COVID has helped raise awareness of what different disabilities are out there?
I think it has, but it's also, I mean, diversity in terms of how we think about this. It's not just about, none of us fit into this one category of disability. As I mentioned before, you have age, you have race, people, black and ethnic people have had extremely high well-being impacts, compared to the general white population. For example, if you're LGBT and you've moved away from home and you're a young person, you go back into home, quite often into potentially an environment where the family doesn't really understand or is hostile. That can have a huge impact, knock-on effect. So at the start of COVID, actually, I remember it quite clearly. I bumped into our chief executive in the car park just as we were all being told to go home. And there was a lot of anxiety around what on earth is going on and uncertainty. And he asked me to look at this and to think about what the impact was on different groups. So I did an equality impact assessment on all the different groups and put together a plan. It was kind of a bit rough and ready, really, but the wellbeing group in Diamond worked through that plan. And we have mental health first aiders. I think we have about 46, which in a population of 750 is pretty good. So there's been some work around that for a number of years. But we're still seeing the impact of that. The impact on women, for example, in particular, having had additional childcare, maybe their outputs are slightly different, which will have ongoing impact on their career, so if we don't actually put things into place to mitigate those impacts. But there's an awful lot of support out there, government support. So, for example, Shaw Trust, we've had Shaw Trust come in and talk to our population a couple of times now, and they offer 9 months of coaching for people with, well-being issues, poor mental health, anxiety, and so on. So 9 months of coaching where you can check in with somebody who can listen to you. Maybe you don't want to speak to your line manager, but you can, build a relationship. And we recognise that it does take quite a long time to come out of something like this. So that kind of support, as Kate said earlier, the perception of cost being an issue doesn't necessarily need to be an issue. So, and it supplements our occupational health service as well, which obviously is busier than it was before COVID. So yeah, a good strong programme of work with an emphasis on mental health is absolutely critical and will continue to be for the foreseeable, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've got a lot going on. So I think unless Kate, you wanted to add anything further, I think I'll let you get back to your work. Thank you very much both for joining us.
So a really interesting thing about that interview is how disability in the workplace isn't something that is kind of you can address it once and then you're done, because as they highlighted there, the pandemic has completely changed the way that we need to view disability in the workplace, and be more accommodating for things that may have changed in the last few years. Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was really interesting the idea that one of the most important aspects of Julie's job is raising awareness, for people who might even have disabilities themselves, so they can get the support that they might need to, do their job even better than they might already be doing it. It does really make you think. A few of the things that they kind of mentioned, I suspect that there's people in our office and there's people who will be listening to this who have those either ailments or conditions, but they don't necessarily see them as a disability and they don't see them as something that their employer should help them out with. So it was really interesting hearing about that and an employer's responsibility to their employees on this kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And you can find out more, actually, Liam, about what employers' responsibilities are in our latest Team Around the Client magazine at roydswithyking.com/TAC6. That's TAC and the number 6. And yeah, do you want to help people find out where to subscribe to our podcast in future? Absolutely. So the podcast is called Legal Thinking, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. Thank you for listening. Thank you.